so happy to be here. It is my first time in Mexico. Thank you. So I wanted to start today by telling you a story about a girl I once encountered. Like me, she was Eastern European. But from where exactly in Eastern Europe, nobody knew. You see, when she was found wandering the streets of Dublin in Ireland, she couldn't speak a word. She was dazed and confused. She seemed absolutely traumatized. She was brought to the police, and they tried to figure out who she was, and they couldn't. And it took multiple days for her to finally start communicating. And when she did, it wasn't through words. It was through drawings. And what she drew was absolutely just ghastly, mind-bogglingly ghastly. There she was, a little stick figure, being brought on a plane by a group of men. There was that same little stick figure on a bed surrounded by a group of men. It became very clear very quickly that they were dealing with a victim of human sex trafficking who had somehow managed to get free and find herself in Dublin. They spared no resources in trying to figure out who this girl was so that they could reunite her with her family and end this tragic story. They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, hundreds of man-hours trying to track her down. And finally, they did something they never do with minors, because it seemed like she was 14, maybe 15 years old. They released her picture to the press. And you don't do that lightly, because you're really treading on some shaky ground there. But it actually paid off, because within 24 hours of releasing her picture, they had her identity. Her name was Samantha, or Sammy, as a party. Except here's the thing about Sammy. She wasn't Eastern European after all. She was Australian. She wasn't 14 or 15. She was 27 years old. She was not a victim of sex trafficking. She came from a very well-off family in Australia, had never been abused a day in her life. She was a con artist, a serial impostor. By the time we catch up with her in Australia, she has already been convicted of fraud multiple times. She gets deported from Ireland, ends up coming back, this time as an au pair to take care of 2 little boys under yet another name. Then she gets bored because, it's a hard job taking care of kids. So she goes to Canada, where she becomes Aurora Hepburn, does this yet again, has the Canadian government looking for who she is, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on her, only to discover that she's an imposter, and send her back to Australia. And I can guarantee you guys that her story is far from over. So when I first encountered as a party, I found myself fascinated because I actually, in some perverse way, saw a piece of myself in her. I am a writer, I'm a storyteller, and I operate by the mantra that, the pen is more powerful than the sword. The stories we tell matter, and what we say matters. And she was this funhouse mirror reflection of me. She was a better storyteller than I could ever be. Con artists are the consummate storytellers, except in their hands, stories become a force of evil, not a force of good. And so I spent 3 years of my life immersed in this world trying to figure out, how is it that stories are so powerful, and we never think of them as powerful in a bad way, and yet they can be powerful in a very, very frightening way that is certainly much more powerful than the sword. Storytelling is the oldest language we have. It precedes verbal language. I mean, we have, cavemen around fires talking about that big, scary bear over there, or the god of the river who was angry, and the thunder and the lightning. You have the Lascaux cave paintings. long before we had formal language, we had stories to connect to each other. In fact, psychologists have found that nonverbal cues are much more powerful than words oftentimes in conveying information. So in one study, they had a group of actors in a play, and then they distorted the words a little bit, so it was really hard to understand. And they had lots of people watch this video and try to figure out what in the world was going on. And they found that nonverbal cues, things like tone of voice, inflection, gesture. What I'm doing right now, I think we all do it all the time, unconsciously, we're 22 times more predictive in figuring out what was going on than verbal cues. And tone of voice alone was 4 times more powerful. So when they distorted the tape completely so that you couldn't understand a single word, people still reliably found out the story. And now you might say these are professional actors. They're overacting. Of course you can figure out what's going on. But I will tell you that con artists, and they are among us, they are the best professional actors in the world. This is their life. They live these stories each and every day. What happens with stories is that they're incredibly emotionally powerful, and when we're in the throes of this emotion, our logic kind of shuts down. I mean, what kind of a person would I be if someone came up to me and said, "I'm so sorry, ma'am, my car broke down. I need money to get to my daughter in the hospital. I'm late for her surgery." What am I going to do? "Excuse me, can you please show me your hospital records? Are you sure you're late? Is your daughter really sick? Are you sure you're a victim of sex trafficking? Were you really abused? I think I need to verify this before I'm going to help you." Of course not. That would make me a monster. That is not the kind of human being I want to be. I don't think that's the kind of human being any of us want to be. And con artists, storytellers, take advantage of that because emotion is far more powerful than logic. At Princeton University, Deborah Prentice decided to figure out just how much more powerful. If you knew that a story was fictional, if you knew from the onset that it wasn't true, would you still believe the things in it just because you were in a story? So she took a bunch of novels. So there's a novel from the 80s, The Lyre of Orpheus. This was one of the novels she used. And in it there's a character, Maria, no relation to me, who says something along the lines of, she's talking about fetal alcohol syndrome. And she says, you have to drink quite a lot in order for there to be any problems with the baby. Well, this is absolutely false. Any scientist will tell you that this has no bearing on reality of fetal alcohol syndrome. It only takes a little bit of alcohol. It's all about the timing, not the amount. And yet, she found that when people read this, even though they knew they were reading fictional excerpts, later on, they believed it to be true. Even when there were things like, the sun is actually really good for your skin. People read it and said, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. Awesome. I'm going to go sunbathing now. That's really cool. And later on, they remembered all of these facts in the fiction as true. Now, when I first saw this study, I thought, that seems a little like BS. I mean, maybe in a study this happens, but I don't think it happens in real life. I mean, I don't take fiction as truth. I know it's a story. And then I found myself at a dinner, and I was telling people about old New York and how the streetcars in Union Square were poorly designed. The corners were too tight, and so they actually went too quickly, and they hit a lot of pedestrians. And in the 1800s, there were tons of deaths in Union Square from streetcars. And one of my dinner companions said, that is fascinating. I've actually been meaning to find a book on the history of New York. Where did you get this? This sounds like the perfect book for me. And I thought about it, and I said, oh, it was that novel I read last year. So I actually had no clue whether what I had been telling her very, with a lot of gravitas and a lot of authority was even true. I had just assumed it was true. I hope the writer did good historical research, because otherwise I just really told people the wrong thing. And the reason this happens is because when we process the world, we do it in 2 stages. So first we trust, first we believe. That's our default stage. And only then do we verify. The psychologist at Harvard, Daniel Gilbert, calls this the 2-step process of understanding the world. I call it the pink elephant process, because when I say pink elephant, all of you, for 1 minute, have to picture a pink elephant. even if it's a fraction of a second, before you realize, oh, pink elephants don't exist. That's not true. Verify. What happens is, in stories is we're not motivated to verify. That second step never actually takes place. And so we end up with a bunch of pink elephants running around Union Square causing fatalities. And what happens in the most emotional of stories is we don't even realize that's happened. We don't want to verify. We don't want to know they're not true. We would much rather believe them they're not. And think about what a dangerous thing that is. I mean, stories are all around us, right? Politicians tell stories. They say that the lawyer who wins the trial isn't the lawyer with the best evidence, but the lawyer with the best story. That's who the jury listens to. We are surrounded by storytellers. We are surrounded by stories like Sammy Zapardi's. And by the way, she did come back. I have an email alert out for her name. And a few months ago, lo and behold, I got a little alert that said, hey, Sammy knows you're going to be doing a talk about her, so she's decided to pull another shenanigan. She didn't actually know, but she did pull another shenanigan. She ruined this poor American tourist's life in Australia by pretending to be wanted by Interpol. Long story short, this American tourist was deported for procuring fake IDs because she thought she was helping this girl out of this terrible situation. She now has a criminal record. So stories are, and Sammy does not. So stories are incredibly powerful and something that we should realize. And I think that's something that I'd never really thought about until I was in this world, is that stories are all fun. You know, writing is wonderful, journalism is great, but stories do not have a moral compass of their own. Their only moral compass is in the teller. So a story is only as good as the person telling it. And so if you end up with the Sammy Zapardi's of the world, then that is not a very comfortable place to be. And I think it's up to all of us to realize just how powerful stories are, just how much we rely on them, how much they permeate our lives, how much we tell them, how much we believe them. And then I think it's on us to make the stories that truly deserve to be told, the stories that need to be spread, the ones that are spread, rather than the other way around. I think it's a lesson that we in the United States have just learned the really, really hard way. And I hope the rest of the world doesn't have to learn it in quite as hard a way in the future. Thank you very, very much.